stone piece for a lot of people, where like going to other mental health support system or like institutions is really scary and kind of sterile and clinical for a lot of people. And having somebody else who's done it before is like the biggest thing for people to be able to like be comfortable and actually get the help that they need and, you know, be 100% there when they're doing it. So that's what I've heard from a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, well, you've also been in it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. And like, I don't know. I like obviously not as much as you, but I don't know. Even now, like, you know, Alex, like Rivers.
Yeah,
like,
yeah. Alex is dope.
I'm still in touch with her.
Okay.
And, like, she's going through it, but like,
okay, yeah.
I feel like her and I now have like somewhat of a peer support relationship where
That's
like
dope.
I'm helping her do some things or helping them do some things. Sorry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it is a lot more helpful to have somebody to, I don't know, not necessarily complain or like vent about other mental health support that they get.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like it is sometimes that where it's like this mental health supporter is supposed to be like helping me, but they don't really understand this about me. Who do I talk to about that part of it, right? So
yeah, you know, I think there's like a couple pieces that really resonate for me. I think it's dope that you and Alex are still talking, by the way. But, you know, a couple pieces that really resonate for me are, one of the things you brought up was navigating the system, and not just the logistics of the navigation, but the experience of navigating and how stressful that can be, or how intimidating it could be, or how much fear and anxiety goes into navigating, or confusion.
Yeah.
When you have someone you can talk to about that, all of a sudden it doesn't make you feel like you're this outsider, or you're some kind of like weirdo, or like all these, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's like there's a lot of shame associated with like going for help, like like reaching out for help in any way, and then feeling like it's not doing much, and then you think like, oh, am I the problem here? Like, what am I doing wrong that's like making this not as good for me as for other people? And like, I think that's a pretty common thing to go through, but it's hard to feel that way unless somebody else tells you it, right? So
yeah, dude, I felt like that for years.
Yeah.
For years.
Me too.
Right? Because you're just by yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you know, you're by yourself, but maybe you have a support system in the sense of like, you know, your parents are involved, or siblings, or friends even. But if they've never walked through the system, you know, you go to the hospital, you go to see your therapist, you make the calls or whatever, and they're like, how was it? How are you doing? You're like, oh, it was this, it was stressful, it was that. There's like not that much more they can offer you.
Yeah.
You know
Unless
what I mean?
they know, right? So,
right. Yeah.
And like, do you have like any personal experiences of like that feeling that come to mind for you?
Absolutely. You know, I think the first time that I really intentionally tried to go to therapy, I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I went to, I think, one session, and I like did the assessment, and I remember being in the space and meeting the therapist was a very nice guy. Yeah. The space, like, it was all right, you know, but when I walked in, I just kind of felt like, do I belong here?
Yeah.
Is this the right place for me? You know, am I the demographic that they're used to serving? You know, all these different things came up for me. And if I had had someone in that space who I could relate to, it would have completely changed how I engage with that space.
Yeah.
But because I didn't have that in that space, I was like, well, you know, not for me. And it wasn't like, not just like, not for me. It was also like, I'm like, it's almost like scared to be there.
Yeah. Well, like, why scared?
Because I was feeling all these like feelings of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe scared is the wrong word. Maybe that's a word I'm using to describe a discomfort that I have trouble attaching labels to. But there's definitely this discomfort and like this shame that came up for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, when you're a 16-year-old boy,
yeah,
right? Like, shame is the last thing you want to feel, because like shame and your perception of masculinity kind of go hand in hand,
tied together,
right?
Yeah.
And then you start to feel like less masculine and like less of a man, and like all these things that like obviously we know now don't matter.
But when you're a teenage boy, You can't really get past that. So.
Right. So, and that's just the teenage boy aspect of it. But I imagine, there are similar feelings for different people in different parts of their life or from different demographics, right?
Yeah.
So, again, it would have been so much easier for me to engage if like there was somebody in that space who I could relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And it, a lot of times people like boil it down to like, a black person wants to talk to a black therapist, and I do, don't get me wrong, but it's deeper than that for me. It's like I want to talk to someone who's been through the journey, right?
It's not even just the representation, it's like the emotional representation, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Right. So and then so I didn't go back.
Yeah.
Not at 16 anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I ended up like finally when I was like 22 or 23 or whatever, engaging with therapy and still not feeling 100% comfortable with it, but it felt like I had to do that or else. So I did that. It helped, don't get me wrong, but I still felt that like loneliness. And what was really interesting about it is that when I went through therapy the first time, I came out with a bunch of tools that really allowed me to develop relationships in my life. So I started to like date, and I started to have friendships that were more meaningful, but I still felt lonely.
Yep.
Right. Which was weird because I was going out every weekend, and like I said, I was dating, and I got a pretty good job, and I was very well liked in my job, but I felt lonely. And then I found a space where there were a lot of other people who had gone through the mental health journey.
Yeah.
And many other aspects of their story were completely like dissimilar to mine. Like, I grew up, in the projects and poverty and all this stuff. And my story was, in that way, was a lot different from everyone else in the room. However, the thing that we had in common was mental illness and walking through this journey. And that just made me feel so safe and feel so accepted. And it was definitely the turning point for me in learning how to accept myself and my story. Yeah. And made me want to support other people in that way.
Yeah. And what was the place?
I don't know if I could talk about that, but
okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
But just like a good community of people who like understood you in a different way. Like even if they weren't like didn't look the same, like didn't come from the same background. It's just that other part of you that they can kind of connect to makes it a lot more safe. And I agree with that with like various different like groups I've been into. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
I think there's something to be said about shared experience. Mm-hmm. And a mental health experience is unlike so many other experiences in life, in the sense that you can have different experiences in terms of upbringing. Maybe one person in the group grows up rich and the other person grows up poor. Maybe someone grows up in a different country or whatever, all these like different on the surface ways of living and getting into the same room. But the thing that brings you all together is that mental health journey and that piece. And that's where that connection happens and where you're able to support each other.
Yeah. And it's for people who haven't gone through mental illness, it's like you can kind of sympathize and read up and kind of do your research and understand in some level. But like, it is something that is very hard to like feel for somebody if you don't really know what it feels like. And so like, out of lots of experiences in life, I think that one, like going through mental illness in whatever form it takes, is like something that is very personal and visceral that people can't necessarily understand. So
absolutely,
the community aspect, like I don't know, changes so everything for some people.
It's like, do you know what it's like to be in love until you've been in love?
Right. Same thing. Like it's
right.
You can't even. People try to describe it and like endless pieces of art and music and whatever try to describe it, but like you can't really get the same experience from any of that. So
exactly. And even thinking about what I just said about like being in love, like I remember being like a kid and you know, my parents would play love songs and whatever. I'm
Yeah.
like, why are you listening to this nonsense? You know, because I didn't get it, right? You know, and then like now as like an adult, you've had your love experiences. I'm like the same songs. I'm like, I really feel that.
Yeah, I get that one.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like for me, the whole like peer support, mental health, shared journey piece is a lot like that.
Yeah.
Where there are things that only people who've been through it can experience. It's like you can't be an addictions counselor unless you've experienced addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't experienced like serious addiction to a substance.
Yeah.
So I could never be an addictions counselor.
Right. It's just like, one, you don't like have the experience, and two, people won't give you the, I guess, authority, or like they won't attach the understanding to you that they need to move on and like you know, grow. I think it's the same with like a lot of things, where if you don't think somebody teaching you something has really any idea what they're talking about, not that, you know, people who haven't gone through addictions like don't have a lot to say and like great things to share, but if you think somebody doesn't actually know what they're talking about or hasn't experienced it, you're not going to take heed of anything they, like any advice they give you. So
absolutely. And I think that is the key to peer support right there. You know, there's this discourse sometimes of like, is peer support better or worse than structured therapy? And I think the discourse is focusing on the wrong thing. They're focusing on like the efficacy of the science, when really, you know, what we need to be looking at is the person that we are trying to support. How much do they feel they're understood by the person that's supporting them, and how much do they feel like that person can truly get them? And like, when you feel like the person you're talking to understands you, they could be saying the same thing that someone else who doesn't understand you the same way is saying in the same way, with the same educational background, but the kind of visceral knowing that this person who's supporting you understands you, at least in some part, because they've had a similar or a journey that might have looked a little bit like yours. It kind of, you know, it's almost like this magnetism is created where what they say and what they do can have a little bit more weight and more value. You know?
100%. And like, I find from what I've heard, not that I have like as much experience, and like chime in if this makes sense, but I find with a lot of people I've talked to, a huge thing about the peer support is like being better at using other resources and like giving it like the time it deserves, or like treating it in a certain way that might work better for you, rather than going in blind. And like it's not, I think a lot of people conflate like the value of peer support with like being equal to some other like resources, right? Which isn't necessarily the case. It's like,
it's not a competition,
an amplifier, I would say.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's some people can't get any value out of other resources without doing peer support first and like being comfortable doing it. And some people get similar value from the other, like from peer support as the other like institutions and things like that. But it kind of varies per person, which makes sense for peer support, right?
And you know, I've been in situations in groups, you know, I facilitated groups where once there's like rapport within that group, you start to see people sharing their experiences with each other in a way where it's not just about the symptoms they experience. It's like, I tried this thing that worked for me in this way. And I think that like the conversation becomes more nuanced when people have gone through the experience of trying to access a system or a therapy or a medication. And you know, I remember this conversation that's like coming into my head now. I actually forgot I even had this memory. Where the conversation was around bipolar disorder. And I was in this group where we were all supporting people who had serious mental illness. And, one person was talking about the amount of medications that they had to try in order to arrive at the one that worked for them.
Yeah.
And their experience in trying all of those things allowed them to support someone at the beginning of their journey to be better able to advocate for themselves, to be better able to understand side effects of different things,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of say, hey, I'm not saying not to do this or to do this, but here's what you might want to look out for when you try these different pieces. And, sometimes there are side effects that aren't on the bottle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is what it might feel like once you try this or do that.
Yeah.
And that's very valuable information that maybe you're not going to get from any other entry point into the mental health system.
Yeah. Like the psychiatrist can tell you, here are the 5 like side effects of this medication, but like you can read it off a list and you won't really understand the consequences of everything. Like I've taken ADHD meds and had to try a few different ones before I landed on one. And one of the biggest things was like I basically couldn't eat once I started. And like,
how come? I've never been on
it's
ADHD
like, it's
meds,
an appetite
so I don't know.
suppressant. So
Okay.
like, and I had very like weird sporadic like eating schedules. So like I would skip breakfast here and there, or then I would skip lunch, or like it really depended on when I eat.
Okay.
And like if you take ADHD meds at a certain dose, it like very much suppresses your appetite. Plus coffee makes it even worse.
Okay.
And like I didn't understand that. They said, oh, you might like might feel less hungry, and I was like, okay, that's fine. But like I didn't realize I wouldn't be eating from like when I took the meds to like 8 p.m. at all. And I was like, ooh, this is bad. I'm getting headaches. Like, but like I have a ton of friends who like had also gone through something similar. So then talking to them, they were like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense. You got to eat something when you take it. And then
even if you don't feel hungry.
Even if you don't feel hungry, you have to eat something. And I was like, okay, so that's something I need to do for this to like work better. And I wouldn't have like, I would have had to figure that out on my own. It wouldn't have been as fast and like as comfortable, I guess.
Now imagine a world in which the person that you first went to, who was supporting you in choosing the medication, also gave you that information.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Like it would have made things so much smoother. And like that's the whole thing with peer support, right? With not just medication, like literally anything, like any problems you're going through. So
that's it, and yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I feel like this is. We're in the world, so we understand to some extent like how powerful it can be, right? And then you talk to anybody else who's experienced it, and they're like, "Man, this was a game changer for me."
Yeah.
But then there's the other like 80% of people out in the world who are just like,
or like, but what about the studies? But what about like, where are they? And it's like, okay, you got to do something first. Like you got to do something.
That's so, real, yeah. And yeah, that's super real, and the little bit of literature that does exist does point to peer support being really effective.
Yeah, it does.
Reducing hospital admissions, reducing suicidality, and all the other metrics that we use to, say like whether or not an intervention is effective or not.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. For me, I'm just like, we have this thing, this method that's super helpful.
Yeah.
But we're not leaning into it almost because it's not scientific enough.
Yeah. And it's like a chicken or the egg thing.
Yeah.
Where like nobody wants to do it because it's not scientific enough. But you have to have somebody do it in order to do some research and get data and like build out how like the efficacy studies and things like that. So
yeah. And what does it even mean to be scientific? I think sometimes it's like, I don't know if you ever like played like team sports or whatever, or any kind of sport. When you're first learning the sport, and I think that there's this idea sometimes when you're first learning the sport that you have to do all this fancy stuff to be good.
Right.
When actuality, being good at a sport, you kind of go through this arc of like, you're not very good at the beginning. So then you learn like 12 different ways of doing whatever it is you're trying to do in the sport. And then as you get better at the sport, you realize that actually it's really about doing 3 or 4 things really well.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a simplification process that happens that allows you to be really good at the thing. And I think that peer support is a lot like that, especially when you juxtapose it against like our framework for how we think of things as important or good, or we often think that things are more important or they're better when they're more complicated. Like
Right.
when we write, we think better writing means longer sentences and more syllables in the words, when in actuality the opposite is true.
Yeah, not
Right.
true, right?
And I think peer support is a lot like that, because it's on when you explain it to people, it's like such a simple concept. And
Yeah.
they're like, how could something that simple be that effective?
Yeah. And a lot of people will say, well, don't all these other people know how to do that? Like, and that's a hard thing to explain, right?
Well, and the other piece to it is that it's actually not that simple. It just looks simple
Yeah.
when you're doing it well.
Yeah.
Like anything else, right?
Yeah. What does good peer support look like to you? Actually, hold that thought. I
Yeah.
want to check the camera.
Okay.
Make sure.
No, it not recording. Well, we got the audio.
We got the audio and we got this camera.
Okay. Did the card run out?
No, it's not the card. The screen turned off.
Do you think it's recording without the screen?
It's either that the cord disconnected